This is the Russian world, a terrifying cesspool that the Kremlin wants to drag the entire planet into. The ideology of the Russian world is that everyone should live as badly as Russians do.
Take flight Starling into the rebellious knights. We're getting drunk, asking for another shot. It's long past time for us adults to be poured a drink. So why the hell are we just standing here?
And this is Vladimir Putin, a truly notorious war criminal, and the principal guardian of the cesspool known as the so-called Russian world. Or, well, maybe it's his double. Basically, the serfs don't care whose boots they have to kiss, as long as NATO doesn't seize the wooden outhouse near Kostroma.
Look, this is toilet paper, or you can use it as a rag. I'm going to the bathroom.
People in the so-called Russian world often live in conditions of extreme poverty, primarily because nearly all the available money and resources are spent on endless wars to expand the Russian world, on relentless propaganda that convinces its followers to die for it, and on bribing Western politicians who, in turn, whitewash and justify these ongoing wars of aggression.
This is the reality, and thanks to the President of the European Commission, the European Union, acting thoughtlessly, based on poor forecasts, and with a failed strategy, entered this war. What a speech, Mr. Orban. Truly, what a speech this Ison that will be remembered. You say you want to stop migration, that you are determined to protect your country's borders and keep your people safe. Yet at the same time, you let Russian spies into our Schengen system and even call it a national guard. How can you explain this contradiction, Mr. Orban? Is this really what you are doing, Mr. Orban? You are not a patriot. You are simply a useful idiot for Russia.
The Kremlin has poured billions into creating its own avatars all over the world. In Europe, as a rule, they were put on the gas pipeline and given a special valve as a reward. Under the influence of Russian gas, these lackeys corrupted the EU from within and acted as personal advocates for Moscow's thugs. The especially gifted ones retired immediately to Gazprom.
After Schröder stepped down as Chancellor of Germany, his friendship paid off. He received a position in the controversial Nord Stream gas pipeline project, through which Russian gas was supposed to flow directly to Germany. Then, in 2014, right after Russia annexed Crimea, Gerhard Schröder celebrated his 70th birthday in St. Petersburg.
But Ukraine finally shut off the tap, and Moscow's gas lifeline was cut. Naturally, the well-fed Russophiles howled in outrage. Slovak Prime Minister Fico even threatened to stop supplying electricity to Ukraine and started shrieking that Kyiv had cost Slovakia $1.5 billion in damages. How many shells Russia could produce with Slovakia's gas money, Fico chose not to specify.
I'm not here to simply walk hand in hand with Zelensky. I have to admit there are times when I genuinely get tired of it. He goes around Europe, just begging and blackmailing, asking others for money. This simply needs to stop. Try thinking about our country for a change, not just for your own narrow, simple political goals. For heaven's sake, what on earth are we going to do when the money eventually runs out? Do you really think the Germans will send us any money? No, they won't send us anything at all.
Fico immediately flew to Moscow for consultations. He explained this by saying he was very concerned about the well-being of the Slovak people.
Of course. Of course. Of course.
But after his visit to the capital of the Reich, Fico mysteriously disappeared. He couldn't be found for 2 weeks until his tanned little body was discovered in Vietnam at a 5-star hotel. So, according to Fico, his country has suffered a terrible, irreparable economic blow. But he calmly goes on vacation.
You really can't imagine I'm flying off to Gagra right now.
The Prime Minister was exposed thanks to a video that he himself posted. In this video, he was once again complaining about Ukraine and the losses that the Slovak people would suffer. Ironically, Fico was lamenting the difficult fate of Slovaks from a hotel room that cost 6,203 euros per night. Considering that he hadn't been seen for 2 weeks, we can assume that Fico was worrying about the Slovaks to the tune of 87,000 euros. And that's just for accommodation. Only Gazprom knows how much he ate there.
Thank you.
6,000 euros per room, that's half of Prime Minister Fico's monthly salary and 4 times the average monthly wage in Slovakia.
Who's footing the bill for this feast? Who will pay for it?
Where does an honest and noble Slovak patriot get that kind of money? That's not a rhetorical question.
Elementary, Watson.
It just so happened Fico went on an expensive vacation right after his visit to Moscow. We're not implying anything, it's just an interesting sequence of facts.
I started to get suspicious.
Fico's vacation even drew a reaction from the president of Ukraine. Oh, it would be more accurate to say he trolled the Kremlin's troll. Zelensky congratulated the Slovak Prime Minister on Twitter on finishing his expensive vacation and expressed his sympathy, saying it's not easy to live it up instead of solving the country's problems.
The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, has accused the Slovak Prime Minister of helping Putin make money to continue the war against his country.
The president of Ukraine also publicly wished Fico to make friends with common sense and to clearly say goodbye to Moscow's shadowy gas schemes.
Bill, goodbye, my love. Bill, oh.
Zelensky added that Moscow is giving Slovakia significant discounts, but the price for them is sovereignty and shadowy schemes.
In Slovakia itself, people also no longer want to tolerate the Kremlin's Buratino. Thousands of people took to the streets demanding Fico's resignation. Slovaks are outraged by their prime minister fraternizing with war criminals and his open support for Russia and its aggressive war.
On Friday, a mass demonstration against Prime Minister Robert Fico took place in the Slovak capital Bratislava, similar to the protests of last week. According to the protesters, the rallies were prompted by his pro-Russian stance and his recent meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
People on the streets of Bratislava are chanting, "We are Europe! Slovakia is not Russia!" They are calling Fico a traitor and telling him to go to Moscow.
At Friday's demonstration, thousands of people carried EU and Slovak flags and held signs reading, "Fico, go to Moscow and we want to live in a free country."
The public's anger has fallen not only on Fico, but on the entire ruling elite. A telling example was the protest by a Slovak student who refused to shake hands with Slovakia's pro-Russian president Pellegrini. The political problem is that, in my opinion, he got into office through deceit and lies directed at the people. He insisted, aside from the evergreen populist promises about cheap food and cheap gas, which are repeated in essence at every election by every populist political force, calm music.
He accused his opponent of planning to send us to a war in Ukraine, which has nothing to do with us. He would never have sent us there. That's why I believe it was a lie. It was an appeal to the basest human currents of fear, and among some parts of the Slovak population, perhaps even to some anti-Ukrainian sentiment. And I don't think it would be right to shake hands with such a person.
The situation isn't any better for Fico's buddy, Viktor Orban. By a strange coincidence, he also disappeared for several days and was later found at a resort. Orban is having fun in India. Apparently, he went there in despair to complain to the elephants that the evil Ukrainians had cut off the gas.
I'm outraged. Absolutely.
In Hungary, the opposition has called for early parliamentary elections to get rid of the pro-Moscow element and, quote, return the people's right to decide their own fate. According to preliminary polls, Orban's party Fidesz is losing badly to the opposition, and in a fair election, Orban has zero chance. His approval rating has collapsed amid dismal economic growth, high inflation, and major scandals involving the ruling party.
One of the clearest signs that a house is collapsing is when its foundation starts to crack. That's exactly what's happening to Fidesz. Today, for the overwhelming majority of people, supporting this government is simply shameful.
By the way, the opposition leader and Orban's main rival, Peter Magyar, calls Putin an aggressor, which means he is unlikely to be planning any vacations at Moscow's expense.
Today, he arrived in Kiev and visited the Wall of Remembrance for the Fallen, which is located near St. Michael's Cathedral. And just yesterday, Peter Magyar announced that he would be bringing humanitarian aid for the children affected at the Ohmedit hospital.
The Russian world is collapsing not only in Europe, but also on the other side of the globe. In Mongolia, thousands of people have taken to the streets demanding that the government resign. This is the very same government that, in violation of its international obligations, ignored the decision of the International Court and did not arrest the war criminal Putin, who calmly came to Mongolia for a visit.
Dear Mr. Pusu, first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation. Indeed, it has become a good tradition. Practically every 5 years, we meet in Mongolia.
There is a pattern in nature. If you are a friend of the Kremlin, then as a ruler and as a person, you're not that great. The Mongolians are outraged by unemployment, poverty, corruption, and also the terrible environmental situation. The authorities can do nothing about the smog hanging over the capital, because in the 21st century, people are still heating their stoves with coal on a massive scale. But out of Putin's few friends, Maduro's self-proclaimed president of Venezuela stood out the most in his determination to go all the way. After yet another re-election, Maduro declared war on the United States of America. He plans to invade Puerto Rico to liberate that country from the US.
Just as there is a plan for colonization in the north, we have a plan for liberation. And this plan was written for us by Simón Bolívar. The freedom of Puerto Rico is next in line, and we will achieve it, Breno. With the armies of Brazil and Abreu de Lima at the forefront, and Abreu de Lima, go forward. The Abreu de Lima battalion will liberate Puerto Rico. What do you say?
What the hell are you even talking about?
For those who don't know, Puerto Rico is under the jurisdiction of the United States, and right now, the process of fully joining as the 51st state is underway. And most importantly, the Puerto Ricans themselves want this. Several referendums have already been held, and in all of them, the majority voted in favor of joining the United States.
Barack Obama? Sort of.
So Maduro decided to attack the United States. Apparently, he was walking through his palace, slipped on a banana peel, and fell face first into a pile of cocaine. As they say, good luck. There's a theory that democracy will soon come to Venezuela, and the Russian world will finally get out of this South American country, just like it should from every country in the world. All reasonable people are tormented by one question. How has Putin managed for so many years to avoid punishment for his crimes against humanity, which his lookalike, after a bit of cognac, affectionately calls action?
You know, when everything is calm, measured, and stable here, we get bored. Stagnation. We want some action.
Why does civilized Europe keep mumbling and can't put the cigarette butt in his place? Because with Putin's arrival, the Kremlin opened a marketplace there called Useful Greedy Idiots. Moscow was buying up politicians and public figures, representatives of the arts and media in bulk. Anything that was poorly guarded and preferably smelled bad.
Ew! Dennis, it's really stinky here. It's disgusting.
They leased not only washed-up directors like Kusturica, but even entire prime ministers.
What's happening in Ukraine right now? This is truly a struggle for user, for all of us who personally witnessed what happened with those Banderites, especially in Croatia, when they expelled approximately 230,000 Serbs.
As a rule, Moscow is supported by ultra-right populists of a fascist persuasion. They are against Mickey Mouse, Coca-Cola and migrants, and everyone praises Putin very highly.
The President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, received the French presidential candidate and leader of the National Front Party, Marine Le Pen, at the Kremlin. I have long advocated for France and Russia to renew their cultural, economic and strategic ties.
All these Kremlin supporters are corroding the EU from within, blocking or slowing down the adoption of anti-Russian decisions as possible.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán told EU leaders that he intends to wait for the inauguration of US President-elect Donald Trump on January 20, and only after that will he make a decision regarding the extension of EU sanctions against Russia, Bloomberg reported, citing sources. To extend the sanctions, a unanimous decision by all 27 EU member states is required, and Orbán could veto it. Meanwhile, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico stated that the Slovak authorities intend to block any possible European Union sanctions against Russia in the field of nuclear energy.
But fortunately, all these Kremlin assets, even while in power, do not have widespread support in society. Their excessive and relentless love for Putin and Kremlin money is starting to sober up even their most loyal electorate. The Slovak prosecutor's office probes Robert Fico's visit to Moscow.
Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has faced sharp criticism after his visit to Moscow. Fico's meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin took place against the backdrop of the expiring agreement on the transit of Russian gas to Europe through Ukrainian territory.
Fico went to complain to his boss that Ukraine is stopping the transit of Russian gas. Fico got so worked up that he even threatened Kyiv with cutting off electricity supplies. In winter, at a time when the occupiers are constantly striking the power system.
You despicable, wretched, contemptible Bolshevik scoundrel.
I reviewed the details regarding electricity imports from the European Union to Ukraine through Slovakia, which account for about 19%. That's out of the total volume. We are working with other neighbors in the EU, and I have instructed our government members to do everything together with the European Commission and all our partners in Europe to maintain the stability of the unified European energy system. No matter what Putin told Fico when he was in the Kremlin, European rules must be stronger than any particular individual's ties to Moscow.
The public association Peace for Ukraine has submitted a request to the prosecutor's office to investigate this Buratino and shake him down for any rubles in his pockets. The people of Slovakia have also clearly demonstrated their attitude toward Fico's policies. In response to the Slovak government's refusal to join the Czech initiative to purchase shells for Ukraine, ordinary Slovaks themselves launched a fundraising campaign to buy shells. And they have already raised more than 4.5 million euros.
There was also criticism of Fico in Bratislava. Michal Šimečka, the head of the opposition party Progressive Slovakia, said that Fico has turned the state into a tool of Russian propaganda. Šimečka called Fico's visit to Moscow a disgrace for the country and a betrayal of national interests.
The only one who can compete with Fico in his affection for the Kremlin's Führer is Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. Near Rostov, Yanukovych is very sad because Putin has traded him for another Viktor.
I did not simply resign my powers early. I am alive.
Orbán is one of the most notorious apologists for Moscow, an opponent of sanctions and aid to Ukraine. He fights so desperately for the Kremlin's interests that an awkward question arises. What hold does Moscow have over Orbán?
If you really know what I mean, you know.
Most likely, it's not just about the money. The Hungarian opposition even submitted a parliamentary inquiry to the Minister of the Interior to investigate information about Orbán's ties to Russian organized crime.
You are most welcome to our humble abode.
Investigative journalists discovered that the Hungarian Prime Minister had dealings with the crime boss Semyon Mogilevich, and that Mogilevich recorded every instance of money being handed over to Viktor on video. And since it's no secret that the FSB protects all Russian organized crime groups, it means the Kremlin has some interesting compromat on Orbán.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
That's why the Hungarian Yanukovych sweats it out for Moscow's interests so he doesn't end up spending many years in prison back home for corruption, treason, and ties to the mafia.
You'll end up behind bars and rot in a cold, lonely prison.
The EU has finally grown tired of putting up with Orbán's anti-European policies and decided to give him a public scolding. They call him a swindler to his face, Putin's useful idiot, and the biggest corrupt official in Europe. German MP Daniel Freund directly accused Orbán of stealing European funds that were allocated for repairing Hungarian roads and schools. Instead, the money was spent on building palaces. It's no wonder that European politicians are reluctant even to shake Orbán's hand. The president of Romania, for example, didn't even try to hide his attitude toward Putin's lackey.
Upon arriving at the summit, Iohannis got out of the car, deliberately turned his back to Orbán and the welcoming party, and started adjusting his jacket. Meanwhile, the Hungarian Prime Minister stood still and, noticing Iohannis was delaying the greeting, gave a slight smile. The president of Romania approached Orbán and shook his hand 15 seconds later. Journalists have already described Iohannis' behavior as extremely disrespectful and undiplomatic.
With his pro-Putin stance, Orbán is putting all of Hungary at risk, because there are increasingly frequent calls within the EU to strip Budapest of its voting rights and financial support. Naturally, the Hungarian people are not happy about this, And Orban stands a real chance of joining Viktor I at his dacha.
Stop.
Putin's matryoshkas have started getting slapped not only in Slovakia and Hungary, but all across Europe. In Serbia, there are mass protests against President Vučić, a fan of Kulebiaka and Šči. He refused to impose sanctions against Russia. In his opinion, the attack on Ukraine is not a sufficient reason. But for the Serbs themselves, Vučić turned out to be no better an ally than he was for the Ukrainians. In 10 years of his rule, he built a true Russian world with crumbling infrastructure and an overindulged bureaucratic elite.
Belgrade is chanting, whistling and blowing vuvuzelas. Over the weekend, tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets of the Serbian capital with 3 demands. They are calling for the resignation of the country's President Vučić, Prime Minister Vučević and the mayor of Novi Sad, Durić.
The immediate cause for the brewing popular uprising was a tragedy in the city of Novi Sad. There, the roof at the train station collapsed, burying people underneath. But the thing is, that roof had just been repaired.
Is that confirmed?
Obviously, in the best tradition of corruption, all the money for the construction was pocketed, so for the repairs there was only enough for a roll of tape and a ball of twine. Serbian society simply boiled over with indignation. People took to the streets with slogans like "Vučić is a thief."
I honestly don't know what else could possibly happen in a country where nothing works. No one is held accountable for anything. The state of Serbia was responsible for the reconstruction of this station.
It's hard to be a friend of Putin and still remain a normal person. Although, in principle, a normal person can't become a friend of Putin.
But most likely, it's some kind of conspiracy.
While in Slovakia, Hungary and Serbia, they're only trying to kick out the Kremlin's minions. In Romania, they caught on in time and didn't let them come to power. There, in classic fashion, Moscow tried to rig the elections and make the town madman and big fan of the Russian world, Călin Georgescu, president. This Romanian boy in his underwear turned out to be a fascist, a conspiracy theorist and a fan of the Third Reich. Admit it, it's no surprise that he supports Putin. Vladimir Putin is a leader. I understand that she has more than the others in this analysis you're doing. Yes, she does. She loves herself. Indifferently, the prince is broken. Georgescu glorifies Hitler's ally and best friend. The dictator Antonescu hates the European Union and NATO, regularly quotes Russia Today, and believes that Russia is the only normal country on the planet. Everything depends on Romania's path. Everything is at stake for Romania's path. Romania's chance is Russian skill, and Georgescu is also convinced that people are being chipped through Fanta, and that the world is ruled by Masonic pedophiles.
Could be fantastic. It can have the fantastic role, but it is not. Because it's totally under the control of the oligarchs. The problem is that these oligarchs, all of them are connected to the pedophilia system.
And this reptiloid, in the 21st century, in a European Union country, wins the first round of the presidential elections.
How come?
How is this even possible? A mass delusion of the Romanian people? Of course not. It was massive fraud and direct Kremlin interference in the elections. There was proof of unprecedented cyber attacks from Moscow that affected the vote count. The Romanian court annulled the election results and sent Putin's jester packing.
Who are you people? I didn't invite you. Get the heat.
Now, after the downing of the Azerbaijani airliner and Moscow's shameful excuses, the Russian world is being chased out of Azerbaijan with dirty rags as well. They've already tightened the rules for Russian citizens staying in the country. If you add Bulgaria to this, which expelled nearly 100 Russian diplomats, then these are no longer warning bells, but a full-blown alarm announcing the start of a major purge of the civilized world from Moscow's corrupt lackeys, useful idiots, and outright agents of the security services.
I would like to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. Our goal is not to mislead, but to highlight humor. Please take it with a smile.